Hello, lovers of Westeros. I'm Ashley of Noth, and today I'm presenting you with Part 2 of the Quaithe Prophecy Breakdown series. In Part 1, we covered some of the ways Quaithe has helped Daenerys, in addition to establishing Quaithe's goal of getting Daenerys to Westeros. We also decoded her warnings, and in Part 2, we will continue to do so, plus give our thoughts on any Quaithe-related material. So if you're ready, I'm ready, let's jump in. When next we see Quaithe, Dany is settled into Meereen. Daenerys is at a bit of a crossroads. She's questioning her ability to protect her people. She's questioning how to handle the Sons of the Harpy. She thinks no man could love her because she's a dragon, and she's conflicted about her feelings for Daario. Basically, she's lost as a person. To soothe herself, she decides to take a bath in her terrace pool. As she's floating in the water, she hears a rustling noise, calls out for Missandei and her handmaids, and a voice responds that they're sleeping. Dany sees the woman, notes that she's wearing a red lacquered mask, and realizes it's Quaithe. Dany calls to her, asking if she's dreaming, and says she's dreamt of Quaithe on board the Victarion. Quaithe tells Dany, "You did not dream. Then or now." Dany asks how Quaithe got by her guards, and Quaithe says, "I came another way. Your guards never saw me." "If I call out, they will kill you," Dany says. "They will swear to you that I am not here," Quaithe responds. Dany asks, "Are you here?" And Quaithe says no. Let's take a pause. In Part 1, I mentioned to keep in mind that the only time Quaithe was physically in Dany's presence was in Qarth. Now we've circled back to that. Quaithe admitted that now she's not truly there, but Dany isn't dreaming, nor was she dreaming that night on the Victarion. Quaithe made no reference to Qarth at the time, so we can assume she really was there. Why wouldn't Quaithe admit it if that time was like these? So, if Quaithe in this moment is not physically in Dany's presence, how is Dany seeing her? Like Dany, you might think this was a dream, but Quaithe refuted that. The only other plausible explanation I can come up with is that Quaithe is using a glass candle. A glass candle is a candle made of obsidian. They've been known to burn in the past, but hadn't burned in recent memory. That is, until after Daenerys burnt down the House of the Undying, and there were reports of glass candles burning for the first time in 100 years, and again later in a feast for crows at the Citadel. The candles are tall and twisted with sharp edges. When a glass candle burns, the sorcerer sitting in front of it can see across mountains, seas, and deserts, give people visions and dreams, and the sorcerers can communicate with one another from half a world apart. I don't know about you all, but if Quaithe needed a way to communicate with Daenerys across distance that allowed her to slip past Dany's guards and wanted to ensure only Dany sees her, a glass candle sounds perfect. It would also explain how Quaithe was able to make her next set of predictions. It was also the same way Archmaester Marwyn knew he'd meet Samwell Tarly in A Feast for Crows. Both the Archmaester and Quaithe had seen things using a glass candle. So, to pick up where we left off, Daenerys asks Quaithe if she's really on the terrace. Quaithe says no, then follows up with, "Hear me, Daenerys Targaryen. The glass candles are burning. Soon comes the pale Mare, and after her the others. Kraken and Dark Flame, Lion and Griffin, the Sun's Son and the Mummer's Dragon. Trust none of them. Remember the Undying. Beware the perfumed Seneschal." Dany then orders Quaithe to speak plainly and asks what Quaithe wants from her. Quaithe responds, "To show you the way." Fed up with the riddles, Dany repeats the directions Quaithe gave her, saying she knows the way, and then tries to command Quaithe to speak plainly again, but Quaithe cuts her off, saying, "Daenerys, remember the Undying. Remember who you are." It's easy to see why Danny got frustrated. Quaithe never straight shoots and speaks in riddles as though they are a language. Let's start with that last bit. Remember the undying. Remember who you are. Remember the undying is a reference to the undying ones, the topmost of the warlocks in Quaithe. Back when Danny was in Quaithe, she visited them, and they gave Danny very specific information about her future. Quaithe emphasizing the undying must mean that what they predicted was true. It's not so much that Danny can prevent anything from happening, but she can more or less be prepared. Also, the undying backstabbed Daenerys by attempting to drain the life from her. So, Quaithe could be cautioning Danny against others who, on the surface, appear to want to help, but in reality would do the same. Use and suck the life from her. Remember who you are is pretty straightforward. Back in Quaithe, when Quaithe appeared to Danny after the Fire Mage's street show, Quaithe told Danny the mage's skills grew because of her. Danny asked how she could have an effect on the mage, and Quaithe says, "You are the mother of dragons, are you not?" Based off this exchange, we can see that Quaithe thinks of Daenerys only as the mother of dragons and wants Danny to come from that mindset at all times. It's not a coincidence that Quaithe reaffirms this to Daenerys at a time when Daenerys is conflicted about being a dragon, a mother, a lover, and a queen. I also believe Danny needs to be the mother of dragons to fulfill her role in the upcoming war for the Dawn, which ties into Quaithe's motivation to help Daenerys, which of course we touched on in part 1. Let's examine Quaithe's motivation again. She actually tells us exactly what she's trying to accomplish as she's visiting Daenerys on the terrace. Danny asks Quaithe what she, Quaithe, wants from her, Danny. Quaithe answers, "To show you the way." This confirms what we covered in part 1. Quaithe is guiding Daenerys on her path to Westeros, getting her to how things are meant to be, which, as we know from Danny's dream, is her fighting the White Walkers. Whenever Danny veers off track, be it mentally or physically, Quaithe comes to help her find her way again. Which leads us to the bulk of this interaction. Quaithe predicts a group of people that will seek Daenerys out and warns Danny not to trust them. Now, I don't think all of these people are bad. I think Quaithe just wants to keep Daenerys on track and to protect the dragons. Some or all of these people would distract Daenerys or use her for the dragons. Let's start with the Pale Mare. As it would turn out, this is both a literal and metaphorical representation. In A Song of Ice and Fire, the Pale Mare is another name for the bloody flux. The bloody flux is an extremely lethal disease which causes fever, intestinal hemorrhaging, and diarrhea. According to Sir Barristan, he's known the bloody flux, or Pale Mare, to destroy whole armies when left to spread unchecked. So the Pale Mare isn't exactly what you want riding through your city streets. Sidebar, because of how the Pale Mare is used to represent death in the books, I have a theory that any character in the TV show that rides a white horse is gonna die. Anywho, in A Dance with Dragons, a rider on a pale dying horse appears outside the city, and as the horse staggered to the gates, a rider fell from the saddle screaming, "She is burning." Grey Worm commanded the rider be brought to the Blue Graces, and once there, the Blue Graces noted he had a fever and had soiled himself many times. They noted blood was mixed in with his stool, meaning the rider had blood from his bowels. As this was explained to Danny's council, they all conclude the same thing. This man had ridden the Pale Mare, or in other words, had the bloody flux. So, as I stated before, this part of the warning was both literal and metaphorical. The Pale Mare arrived on a pale mare. Next, Quaithe references Kraken and Dark Flame. I believe the Kraken in this warning was representative of a Greyjoy because their house sigil is a Kraken. More specifically, this is referencing my favorite character, Victarion Greyjoy. As we know, Victarion is en route to Marine and in Winds of Winter makes it to Slaver's Bay with the instructions to deliver Euron's marriage proposal to Dany, and to blow the horn Dragonbinder to gain control of the dragons, which, surprise, surprise, would kill Victarion and actually give Euron control of any dragon that hears the horn. Now, that's what he's supposed to do, but Vic plans to court Dany himself, and I suspect Vic will kill two birds with one stone, give Dragonbinder to another to blow, thus claiming Dragonbinder with the blood of the man who died as a result of blowing it, which of course would free Dany up to marry. But how would Victarion know to do this? The Dark Flame, of course. So, who's the Dark Flame? That, ladies and gents, is Makaro. Makaro is a red priest who's been sent by the high priest Benero to counsel and aid Daenerys. Makaro is called Dark Flame because he's described as having, quote, skin as dark as pitch, in addition to having tattoos of red and orange flames on his cheeks and forehead. Aside from the tats, being a red priest gives Makaro an association with flames. Makaro is en route to see Daenerys as stated, but would you guess how he's traveling to her? The Kraken. Makaro is on board Victarion's ship, the Iron Victory, and they are both going to see Dany. How this came to be is a subject for another video, but for now, just to know Kraken and Dark Flame are traveling together. Sidebar, I will tell Makaro's story, but that's going to be part of a whole separate series I'm going to launch in a few months, and how he came to be with Victarion will be covered at that time. Double sidebar, I almost named this channel the Iron Victory because I love Victarion that much, and I'm kind of obsessed. Moving on. Lion and Griffin. The lion is Tyrion Lannister. In A Dance with Dragons, Tyrion has fled across the narrow sea after murdering his father, Lord Tywin, and ends up in Braavos at Illyrio's manse. From there, Illyrio sends Tyrion and some companions to Volantis, where they are to meet Daenerys and unite to share a common cause, a Targaryen restoration. I should probably mention who those companions are. A man called Griff, who's actually the exiled knight Jon Cunnington. Young Griff, who's supposedly Rhaegar's dead son Aegon in disguise. Septa Lamore, whose true identity we don't know, but she too is seemingly someone we do know, but in disguise. Sir Raleigh Duckfield, and Haldon Halfmaester. Things don't go as planned, though, because Tyrion advises young Griff, Fagon, Aegon, whatever you want to call him, to go to Westeros now, raise his banners, and hold tight until Dany comes to him with her dragons. According to Tyrion, this would ensure they, Aegon and Dany, met more as equals versus meeting as queen and supplicant. However, I think Tyrion actually pit them against each other and intentionally set up the next Dance with Dragons. Once young Griff gets a taste of power, wins a few small victories in the field, so on and so forth, is he going to want to share his claim? I think not, and I think Tyrion knows so too, which is exactly why Quaithe warned Dany against Tyrion. His intentions aren't good. That was quite the tangent, my apologies. To get back on track. Before reaching Volantis, Tyrion and crew stop in Selhorys, and while there, rumors of Dany's plight in Marine reach Jon Cunnington, so he sends Haldon Halfmaester and Tyrion ashore to find out the truth of things. Tyrion suggests they go to a brothel since whores, quote, hear much and more from the men they service. While at this brothel, Tyrion is kidnapped by Ser Jorah Mormont to be taken to Daenerys. From Selhorys, they traveled to Volantis, from Volantis caught a boat that was supposed to take them to Quaithe, only they encountered a savage storm which left the ship completely destroyed and were then raided and captured by slavers. From there, Tyrion and Jorah were sold at a slave auction just outside Mare and bought by one of Yunkai's wise masters, Yezan Kagas. I'm sorry, guys, I probably butchered that. Giscari names, what are you going to do? After Yezan dies of the pale mare, Tyrion and Jorah escape, and Tyrion arranges for them to join the Second Sons, who are under Brown Ben Plumm's control. Tyrion has promised them the wealth of Casterly Rock and plans to convince Brown Ben to switch sides again and fight for Daenerys once more. So you can see how in a very roundabout way, the lion is coming to Daenerys. Even though Tyrion is trying to help Dany by bringing the Second Sons back to her cause, Quaithe still warns Dany not to trust him. I believe this is due to Tyrion's role in pitting Aegon against Dany. However, if you all have another idea as to why Quaithe doesn't want Dany to trust Tyrion, let me know down in the comments. I'm really intrigued by this. And I have to say, I don't necessarily think Tyrion is a bad guy. I think that we'll see him, like we did in the show, come around once he meets Daenerys. He'll probably realize that he effed up by interfering with Aegon, and he'll find a way to try and make it right. He probably won't be able to, but he'll try, and I think that's the important thing. Let's talk about the Griffin. You'll recall that I noted Tyrion had a group of companions who'd been sent to Volantis by Illyrio to meet up with Daenerys. One of those companions is the exile lord Jon Cunnington, who's using the alias Griff. This moniker is derived from the word Griffin. A griffin is the sigil of House Cunnington, so we can deduce that Jon Cunnington is who Quaithe was referring to. Jon Cunnington is Aegon's chief supporter and would do anything for him. This is where the waters get murky, and to fully understand why Quaithe would warn Dany against Jon Cunnington, we must do what Quaithe said Dany had to do, remember the Undying. Back in Quaithe, Dany visits the House of the Undying, and while there, she gets a series of visions presented in groups of 3, followed by a title pertaining to said group of 3 visions. One group of visions was the following: glowing like sunset, a red sword raised in the hand of a blue-eyed king who cast no shadow. A cloth dragon swayed on poles amidst a cheering crowd. From a smoking tower, a great stone beast took wing, breathing shadow fire. Mother of dragons, slayer of lies. Now, the first of these 3 visions was likely Stannis Baratheon and his sword that he touts as Lightbringer. That's not so important in the context of this video, but the next 2 visions are. The cloth dragon swaying on poles amidst a cheering crowd is representative of Aegon garnering support from people in Westeros, which, by the way, is exactly what Tyrion said would happen if Aegon went to Westeros and not to Dany in Mare. Next, from a smoking tower, a great stone beast took wing, breathing shadow fire. Many interpret this to be a dragon, and that may well be the case. However, I have another idea. Daenerys is the mother of dragons. She is more familiar with dragons than anyone, so wouldn't you think she'd know a dragon if she saw one? I certainly think so. Also, I don't think Dany would use the phrase stone beast to describe a dragon if she saw one. She'd just call it a dragon. This leads me to think that what Dany saw was not a dragon. So then, what was it? It has to be something Dany's not familiar with for her to have called it a beast. A creature that fits the bill is a griffin, especially if that griffin was covered in grayscale, which would give the appearance of stone. As we know, Jon Cunnington, whose house sigil is a griffin, has grayscale. The shadow fire is representative of him preaching support of Aegon, who's claiming to be a dragon but likely is not.
at least not a legitimate one. Hence why the fire wasn't actual fire. Also, I'd like to point out here that the color of a shadow is black. So you could say that this stone beast was breathing black fire. Just gonna throw that out there. The smoking tower isn't some place that got burnt down by a literal dragon. Instead, I believe this was Griffin's roost that was reclaimed in Aegon's name at the end of A Dance with Dragons. Griffin's roost is House Cunnington's castle and is described as having 2 round towers by the castle's main gate, in addition to the East Tower, which is the largest tower the castle has and provides a breathtaking view of the surrounding countryside. There's also a tower dedicated strictly to the maester. I would bet it's the East Tower of Griffin's Roost Dany saw, though any of these would suffice. What's just as important as the visions is the title that followed, Mother of Dragons, Slayer of Lies. This implies that these 3 visions, Stannis, Aegon, Jon Cunnington, are fraudulent. And all 3 of these men are lying about the same thing, a fraudulent claim to the Iron Throne. It could also be said that Aegon and Jon Cunnington are lying about who Aegon is, hence why the claim would be fraudulent. Now, a case could also be made that Jon Cunnington doesn't know who Aegon really is, and he too is being lied to, but that's a video in and of itself. Anyway, this is why I think Quaithe says Dany must remember the Undying. Quaithe wants Dany to know these men are lying. But it's not enough for Dany to know it. As the Slayer of Lies, she'll have to prove it, and quite possibly kill or slay the liar. This idea that Dany may have to kill a liar is supported by something Dany thinks in A Clash of Kings. While discussing the things she saw in the House of the Undying with Ser Jorah, the following exchange occurs. Jorah asks, "What does any of it mean, Khaleesi? A mummer's dragon, you said. What is a mummer's dragon, pray?" "A cloth dragon on poles," Dany explained. "Mummers use them in their follies to give the heroes something to fight." Clearly, Dany is thinking already that she'll have to fight this cloth dragon. Seeing as she's the Slayer of Lies, this makes sense. I'd also like to note that Jorah says Dany told him of a mummer's dragon, meaning Dany spoke of this long before Quaithe ever used the phrase to her. That Dany and Quaithe used the same phrase could be a hint about Quaithe's identity, because you know, there is that theory out there. But we'll circle back to this phrase momentarily. The sun's son and the mummer's dragon. Let's start with the former. Note the differentiation in the wording. Martin used suns, S-U-N-S, as in the big bright thing in the sky, and son, S-O-N, as in the male offspring of someone. So, whoever this is the male child of someone that's associated with a son. There is one such person who fits the bill that already came to Daenerys in Meereen. This is Quentyn Martell. Quentyn is the son of Doran Martell, and House Martell's sigil is a son. In other words, Quentyn is the son's son. Quentyn came to Meereen to offer Daenerys his hand in marriage, in exchange for Dorne supporting Dany's claim. As previously discussed in Part 1, Dorne is an invaluable ally, so seemingly this betrothal wouldn't warrant a warning from Quaithe. However, things went south after Dany rejected Quentyn's offer since she was set to marry Hizdahr. Feeling the pressure of not wanting to let Dorne and his father down, Quentyn decided he didn't need Daenerys. Instead, the dragons would suffice. So Quentyn decided he would steal and smuggle them back to Dorne. Things didn't go according to plan, though. When Quentyn attempted to subdue Victarion and Rhaegal roasted Quent like a turkey on Thanksgiving. Prince Quentyn died of his burns several days later, and his corpse remains in Meereen. So, in the end, Quaithe was right. Daenerys shouldn't have trusted the sun's son. Now for the latter, the Mummer's Dragon. This is a reference to the aforementioned young Griff, or Aegon. As far as the world is concerned, Rhaegar's son died during the sack of King's Landing. However, it turns out that might not have been the case. According to Aegon, young Griff, he was not the baby whose head was reduced to a, quote, red ruin by the mountain. Instead, a baby swap was orchestrated by Varys. Varys found an alcoholic tanner from Pisswater Bend who was willing to give up his own infant son. After all, the babe's mother was dead and the man had other sons. So in exchange for Arbor Gold, a vintage the man had never tried, he gave up his son. Varys got the babes exchanged, giving the tanner's son to Elia and himself retaining custody of Aegon. He got Aegon smuggled across the narrow sea, entrusting his care to Illyrio Mopatis, before finding an adoptive parent for Aegon. The adoptive father is none other than the Griffin himself, Jon Cunnington, who was also exiled across the narrow sea. Jaqen was Rhaegar's one-time squire, best friend, and also had unrequited romantic feelings for Rhaegar, so he was more than willing to help who he was told was Aegon. It's worth noting that at one time, Varys was a mummer. He was born a slave in Lys and was apprenticed as an orphan to a traveling company of mummers who performed in the free cities, Old Town, and occasionally in King's Landing. So it's logical that Quaithe would refer to Aegon as the Mummer's Dragon, since Varys has been helping him. Now, this is where things get tricky. There are other theories about Aegon's backstory, and depending on what you believe, they may affect your interpretation of why Quaithe would warn Daenerys against him. I'm not going to get into all of them because that's beyond the scope of this video. So for now, I'm going off of what Aegon says his backstory is. Based off that story and Quaithe's insistence that Dany remember the Undying, I'm leaning towards something about this backstory being a lie. Remember, in the House of the Undying, Dany got a vision of a cloth dragon swaying amidst a cheering crowd, and then she is called Mother of Dragons, Slayer of Lies. So something about this cloth dragon is false, and Dany will have to prove it. Also, thanks to Tyrion's interference, Aegon is beginning the Targaryen restoration without Dany, and I think once he gets a taste of glory, Aegon may want to usurp his aunt's crown. Now, if it turns out that Aegon is who he claims to be, then by rights the Iron Throne belongs to him, not Dany. But again, cloth dragon, slayer of lies. I'm with Quaithe on this one. Aegon isn't who he claims to be. As much as it pains me to do this, I'm cutting this video off here. I know you're noticing that I'm excluding the perfumed seneschal, and let me tell you why. The perfumed seneschal is deserving of its own video because of all the things in Quaithe's warning, this specific part is open to the most interpretation. And if I'm honest, as I work through all the possibilities, I'm realizing including them in this video would make part 2 entirely too long. So part 3 will pick up where part 2 left off and have particular emphasis on the group of characters that could be the perfumed seneschal. I'm Ashley of Noth. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and join my Khalasar. And don't forget to give us your thoughts on everything discussed in this video. To my Blood Riders, my current Khalasar, and everyone watching, I hope you have a fantastic day, and from me to you, 7 blessings, friends.